Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Brian McElhatton. Let's go inside Utah politics right now. We have with us Robert Newcomb. He's an independent running for Senate here in Utah. I want to thank you for being on Inside Utah Politics. Welcome.
Thanks, Brian.
So I want to ask you, as an independent, you're a conservative, but you're not aligned with a particular political party. Tell me about why you chose that path.
Well, there's several factors, one of which is the polarity that we see in politics right now. I think, you know, the rancor is just, it was hard for me to watch for a lot of years. So that's probably the main reason. It's hard to see any politics nowadays getting along or making good decisions.
Is the two-party system flawed?
I think it is. Yeah, I think we need a third candidate or a third party that can help make better decisions. I mean, you even look at the current Republican Party. It's a compromise majority, right, in the Senate. And, you know, Mike Lee voted recently on the $1.2 trillion spending bill. No. And then Blake Moore voted yes. So there's even, you know, some consensus problems there between the lower and upper house.
Yeah. So. I want to get into your background now. For those who aren't familiar with you, you served this country in the Navy. You're an engineer by trade, and now you work in the defense industry, still doing work with the Pentagon and the government sector there. What kind of a perspective does that lend to running for office?
Yeah, you know, I think it lends a unique perspective because not a lot of people, or even any that I know of, have spent, you know, 15 plus years in the Department of Defense on classified programs. You know, I spent a lot of time researching China and Russia. I researched threats, you know, to America, and then applied advanced technologies, you know, to those threats. So having that ability as a senator to go in and have that context and have that background, I think is going to prove pretty valuable when it comes to ensuring that America's safe in the future. So,
well, let me ask you about that. You mentioned threats to the country and technology, and I've asked all the candidates so far their thoughts on immigration and border security. What do you think we're getting right about border security, and what do you think we're getting wrong about border security?
So I think we need an effort to bring people into the country, but it has to be the right way. The process we have right now is clearly broken. Biden has it wrong. When I think of illegal immigrants, people that overstay their visa, or people that come across without going through the process, that needs to be stopped and hindered. The problem that I have is when Biden takes out, by executive order, all of those provisions that Trump had in place that seem to effectively hinder, right, the illegal crossings on the border.
Do you support the border wall and funding some kind of physical barrier across the southern border?
I think we have to.
Yeah.
You know, there's not only problems at our southern border, there's problems at our northern border too that need to be addressed. I worked a lot in what we call ISR, Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance. So we used AI or computer vision to surveil a given area. Those are technologies that can easily be applied at our southern border, especially because of the open, right, terrain.
I want to ask you something else I talked to the candidates about, and that is affordable housing in Utah. We're one of the most expensive places to live in the entire country, and it wasn't like that just a few years ago. What do you think you could do at the federal level to help Utah deal with that as we see more people coming and looking to buy and rent?
So I think Mike Lee had it right partially when he proposed a bill to get back some of our federal land. I think there's other measures, though, on the state level where the government can, what do they call them, the land trusts, right, where the state of Utah purchases land trusts for 99 years, and then people can build on that land and not pay for the land, just kind of the rental of the land.
The state would lease the land to these builders. And
that's right. Yeah, and that would dramatically lower, right, the cost of purchasing a home. So Yeah, I agree. It needs to be addressed.
Now, you're a scientist, you're an engineer, and you write a little bit about climate change on your website. What's your position on clean energy and how Utah can capitalize on that?
Yeah, I think this is an important topic going forward because the way I see it, I do a lot of data science, right? I look at the data, I look at how it's funded. In my line of business, we use what's called confidence levels. So we want a weapon system that has a 95+% confidence level that it's going to work. So when I see the current funding avenues of these green energy or climate change projects, I can see that the funding sources are very much heavily leaning towards pushing the idea that climate is the primary source of our global warming. And when I think of like our polar ice caps and I think of the glaciers melting, I think of thermodynamics 101 where it says hot, dense water will melt ice faster than warm air every day of the week, twice on Sunday, And so these factors, how much research are we doing in geothermal venting in polar ice cap regions? Are we taking that data and taking all the data that we've done on climate change over the last 30 years? It's something like 80% of research has gone towards human-caused climate change.
There is a lot of evidence out there that shows the more carbon you have in the atmosphere, the more that warms the planet. And it's warming faster than it normally would be had humans not burned that kind of a fossil fuel.
Yeah, well, look at last year. We had, I think it was the hottest year last year by a percentage that is abnormally from the previous 20 years. Were we burning more fossil fuels last year? I mean, people were driving less, right, during COVID. So, yeah, my issue is, my undergrad was civil engineering, civil and environmental engineering. So I'm very much for the environment and taking care of it. I just want to do it right. I don't want to push the money, because money influences everything, right, when it comes to especially green energy funding. So I want to do it right. I want to do it in a way that's logical, makes sense, and everyone concurs, right, or has a consensus on where the climate change is coming from. So.
We talk about money in politics and that sort of thing. What is it like running as an independent in this race when you've got some big names running, particularly in the Republican Party, for that spot? What's that like as an independent? Are you finding people buying into your message and willing to donate, or what's that been like for you? Yeah,
so this was me getting into the race was a little personal, because I worked in the Department of Defense. In the cell phone business, if you will. I worked in big data. So I kind of knew early where the technology was going. And so when I think of our First Amendment right and the way the Biden administration has basically colluded with tech industry to suppress our First Amendment right, that I have problems with it, because veterans, we take an oath. We take an oath and we swear to uphold, to defend and support the Constitution of the United States. And so when I see an active effort by the executive branch that is clearly overreaching to suppress our First Amendment right, that becomes personal to me. So when I talk to veterans, it's like we're reading each other's minds, because they have the same sentiment and they've had it for several years. So when it comes to veterans, I introduce myself, a lot of them ask me, what can I do to help? Because they see this, the same thing coming. And if Biden gets reelected, it's gonna be even worse, I think. So, if you were to be elected to the Senate, what do you think the first thing you'd like to do is? What issue do you want is it the First Amendment issue? Is it AI and technology? Where do you see yourself really focusing your efforts? We have to, in my mind, put ethics into AI. We talk about business ethics. We talk about other ethical, areas of interest. AI has to have ethics. We're going to see AI start replacing our jobs. When it comes to industry, what's industry going to do for us once we lose our jobs? I mean, even engineers are looking at some kind of reduction in the next, 5 to 10 years as far as the workforce. So to me, we have to implement AI, ethics and AI, and I think on day one, I would want to look at that in detail and ensure we have a plan to change the direction of what AI is currently on, which is tech industry exploiting our data and exploiting our First Amendment in correlation with the executive branch, Biden's administration.
Okay.
So those things have to change.
All right. We'll leave it there. Mr. Newcomb, I appreciate you being on the show.
All right. Thank you,
Pleasure
Brian.
talking with you. Thanks so much. Stay with us, everybody. Utah politics continues. Tension over Gaza. We're breaking that down and what U.S. and Israeli leaders are divided on. The big meeting this week. Stay with us. And we'll talk about abortion at the Supreme Court, the arguments that justices are considering over access to an abortion pill. Abortion is back before the U.S. Supreme Court. This week, anti-abortion groups push to limit access to the abortion pill mifepristone. But are the justices inclined to agree on this? Here's our D.C. correspondent, Maddie Biertemple.
Anti-abortion groups are challenging the FDA's relaxed rules on the abortion pill that have made it easier to access in recent years. Protesters were back on the steps of the Supreme Court.
And people deserve access to it.
For the first abortion case since the Dobbs decision, the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine says the FDA's guidelines are unsafe. They allow the abortion drug mifepristone to be sent by mail and without an in-person doctor's visit.
Without ever having been checked by a doctor for life-threatening conditions. That's reckless.
The alliance is made up of medical groups that oppose abortion. They're asking the High Court to limit access to the drug.
Without question, the FDA's actions have made taking chemical abortion drugs less safe.
But lawyers for the drug maker say research shows it is safe.
The FDA acted on an extensive body of evidence.
The Biden administration defended the FDA in court, saying opponents lack legal standing to bring the case because they aren't harmed by the FDA's rules.
We don't think they come within 100 miles of the kind of circumstances this court has previously identified.
The court seemed concerned that the case could have broader impacts on how many government agencies do their business. This is the voice of Justice Neil Gorsuch.
And this case seems like a prime example of turning what could be a small lawsuit into a nationwide legislative assembly on an FDA rule or any other federal government action.
A decision on the case is expected this summer. In Washington, I'm Maddie Biertemple.
As hostilities in the Middle East continue, there's also growing tension between the U.S. and Israeli leadership, now spilling into very public view. Washington correspondent Trevor Shirley is in D.C. with this.
U.S. officials are hoping to shore up that rift following meetings between high-level officials from both countries this week. As the rift between President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu grows more public,
they haven't in the past agreed on everything, and they don't agree on everything right now. But they both agree on one really important thing, and that is the importance of the state of Israel.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin welcomed his Israeli counterpart to the Pentagon this week.
It's a delight to have you here.
With the war between Israel and Hamas dragging on, U.S. officials are under increasing pressure to get more aid into Gaza.
We need to get a lot more care into Gaza.
Gaza is suffering a humanitarian catastrophe, and the situation is getting even worse.
But Secretary Austin also warning the Israeli defense minister not to invade the Gazan city of Rafah without protections for Palestinian civilians.
We'll discuss alternative approaches to target Hamas elements, and we must also plan for Israel's security after this conflict ends.
And although the rapport between the president and Netanyahu appears chilled, the Israeli leader continues to court congressional Republicans.
Israel has every right under the law, every moral right, a moral obligation to its people to destroy Hamas. I and others have your back.
The White House has yet to lay out any consequences if Israel fails to protect civilians.
Let's take this one step at a time.
And other U.S. officials, including the CIA director, are also expected to meet with the Israeli defense minister while he's in the U.S. Reporting in Washington, I'm Trevor Shirley.
As Inside Utah Politics continues, we'll chat with Wendy Davis, a political scientist and former candidate for Utah House. She has a new book out giving us a behind-the-scenes look at what it's like to campaign here. What surprised her most about Utah's political machine? That's next.
Watching Inside Utah Politics.
Welcome back to Inside Utah Politics. Our next guest is Wendy Davis. And if she looks familiar or you've heard the name, it's because she launched a campaign for the Utah House in 2019. And if you want to know what it's like to run for office in this state, you might enjoy her new book, The Fight You Don't See. Wendy Davis, welcome to Inside Utah Politics.
Thank you, Brian. My pleasure.
So you've done so many things that other people haven't, right? You completed a PhD, which is no small feat. You ran for office. You wrote a book. Tell me why you wanted to write this, first off.
Well, I've always wanted to write a book. I didn't know that this was the book I was going to write, but when I started in 2019, there were so many things happening behind the scenes, and I thought, wow, there is something there. And as a scholar, when I was studying American politics, there weren't a lot of firsthand narratives written by candidates or female politicians. Oftentimes they're at the federal level, really big names, you know, like Mitt Romney. And I thought, what if I told an insider's point of view from something that happened to me, just an average person who ran for office? And that's how it came to be.
So I love the vignettes we have in this book, and I want to ask you about one in particular. You are getting into the political machine, right? And you're talking to people in the party, and there are business people who are kind of working for the party, who are vetting you. You're going out to dinner, you're talking about fundraising, and people are telling you some very surprising things. So where should we start here? I mean, what surprised you the most about that initial process as a candidate?
Well, honestly, what surprised me the most is that there was a process. This is something that I planned to do for a very long time, but had neglected to get into Utah politics. So when I showed up, a lot of people were like, who are you? And we're really just trying to figure out who I was. Was I a serious candidate? Did I have the capabilities to fundraise? Was I going to present well in front of the voters? So I think that's what that was about. They didn't really know who I was. And that was kind of the point. I've always believed that average people who are moms and grandmas and people who hold 9-to-5 jobs should be the kind of people that we want representing us.
So then you have to fundraise.
Yes.
What's that like when you figure out, oh, here's how much I need to raise,
yes,
and how am I going to do this?
It is daunting. It is daunting. And you hear the numbers for a state race, and it's truly overwhelming. And someone said to me, you know, just ask everyone you know. Ask everyone you know for $50, and it starts to add up very quickly. And so I started asking everyone I knew for money, trying not to determine how strong was the relationship, how long had I known them, what was the proclivity to give or not to give. And then it starts to grow, and you start to gain some momentum. And I was able to successfully work with labor. For example, I come from a working class background. And
you ran as a Democrat.
I ran as a Democrat. Oh, we didn't make that clear. I ran as a Democrat in Utah. That was surprising.
Yeah, that's another thing, too,
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So what was that like, running? You're a woman running as a Democrat in Utah. I mean.
Well, the odds are stacked against you from the beginning, but you know that going in. And, you know, I think that people are rational. And where I live in Sandy, Midvale, Cottonwood Heights, it was really primed and ready for change. And I really thought, if we can give the voters a viable candidate to come against this incumbent, we can have a real race here. And so that's what I set my sights on. Set my sights on understanding what my value proposition was, what my values are, and my policies, and really just going out and retail politics, knocking a bunch of doors.
You got really good at the elevator pitch.
I got really good at the elevator pitch. Can you tell?
So what is that like as you're going door to door and you're trying to convince these people, first of all, just to give you a few seconds of their time, and second of all, to consider someone maybe they hadn't heard of before? What's that like?
Well, add to that COVID.
Right,
on top of all that. So to knock or not to knock is actually the name of a chapter. And, you know, is it safe in a global pandemic to even knock on someone's door? And so knock on the door, step off 6 paces. And a lot of people were home. A lot of people were home that summer. I had a chance to talk to a lot of people. Again, I think when we can align on a value, and we all love our families, we love our freedoms, we love our liberties, and we can align on those values, then we can have a conversation. And that's what I did. I was able to say, I'm a mom, I'm a grandma, I want my children to be able to afford housing on the Wasatch Front, I want my grandkids to have good education. We have something in common. We might disagree on how we solve those problems, but that's where you start. If we can align on the problems, we can disagree on how to solve them.
There's another issue you write about in the book, gerrymandering, and how that affected the race. And, coming from another state as well where we're dealing with that, it was very interesting to hear your take as a candidate and the battles, right? And so that is an ongoing story. I hope people read the book and really pay attention to that chapter because that's important. But I want to ask you about, in terms of running for office, if someone has thought, maybe I could entertain that notion, right? What are they getting into? What should they be prepared for from the get-go?
First of all, everyone who's thinking about it should do it. I really firmly believe that. And if we can demystify this just a little bit, it's going to be hard. There are going to be challenges that you don't see, which is why I titled the book, The Fight You Don't See. I liken it a little bit to being a parent. You get into this, you have absolutely no idea what's going to hit you day to day, and you're like, all right, that happened. How do I deal with that? It's very much like that. It's the proverbial you don't know what you don't know, and you just manage it each step of the way. But you'll have to fundraise, you'll have to work with party leaders, party elites, you'll have to work with donors, but most importantly, it's the voters that matter the most.
You sort of went to candidate school. The party had you attend some sessions where you learned how to fundraise, you learned how to get on message and stay on message, right? But you were a person who was very much of your own opinion, and you're not afraid of sharing that. What was that like? You felt a clash there in the beginning?
Well, I've been told, like many women have throughout their lives, you need to watch your tone. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And first of all, I was given amazing training opportunities. The training was extremely helpful, challenged me to think very hard about what this actually looked like. Yeah, there absolutely was some friction, and I write about that friction. And I think a lot of that is when somebody knows things, they know the process, they know the politics, they know the policy, it sets you at a distinct disadvantage. So I was always trying to level set and learn as much as I could so we could be on even footing. And once we're talking about the same thing and walking in the same way, we could be more equal partners. I didn't always feel like I had equal partners in
That's
that
got to be
respect.
frustrating as you're taking on this Herculean task of running for office.
It was very frustrating. It was. And I write openly in the book that I got a mental health expert to help me through it. And I talk openly about that. I think it's something we need to talk more about. There were things that happened on a weekly basis that I needed some way to process. A lot of it I stuffed down. I'm like, well, we'll deal with that after the campaign. But there were a lot of challenges that you might not think there would be.
Well, you described the process as traumatic, going through the campaign and then the outcome of the campaign and dealing with everything that comes with that.
I do think that there is something that we title political trauma, and we don't talk enough about it. I think it happens to candidates. I think it happens to elected officials. I think it happens to the families of elected officials, regardless of party. There are things that happen every day. There was an article that I saw, might have been in one of the local newspapers, about how many of our current lawmakers have had physical threats against them and what that does to them. I mean, that's a lot to take on. So there is political trauma. It happens to candidates. A lot of candidates get discouraged. They have a lot of crazy things happen, and they're like, it's not worth the risk to my family, to my personal health, my emotional health, my well-being, and then they take a step back.
And that harms the democratic process because now you're limiting the candidates who are coming forward saying, I'll try this.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think a lot of good people are dissuaded by some serious things that happen.
Yeah. Well, I hope people will give this book a read, The Fight You Don't See. Wendy Davis, we could talk all day.
I know, it's been great. Thank you so much.
I hope we talk to you again soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Brian.
Appreciate it. Okay, The Fight You Don't See. Check it out if you will. You can get this Amazon, booksellers, pretty much everywhere, right?
Yeah, that's right.
There you go. Okay, everybody, we'll be right back. Before we leave you, here's what's on our radar this week. The Utah Republican and Democratic parties will hold their nominating conventions coming up on April 27th, about a month from now. Lots of campaigning left to do, and we'll have the latest for you each week on Inside Utah Politics. You can count on us for that. You can find ABC4 on social media to follow along no matter where you are. And while you're at it, download the ABC4 News app, would you? We're always on. Thanks for being with us, everyone. We'll see you next week right here on Inside Utah Politics.